I had the opportunity of watching a video of you delivering the keynote address at a lecture, a memorial lecture in his honor. And what a powerful speech you delivered. It's 12 years already.
Yeah. 12 years.
What inspired the speech that you delivered?
Oh, first of all, when I was invited, had to struggle with myself about why I was the person who was chosen to deliver the lecture. And it's a genuine struggle. And you're talking about a former president who had many friends in all spheres of life and great friends, So I couldn't quite resolve that struggle about why I was the person who was chosen to deliver the keynote, lecture. But that was one. Secondly, I realized that I was dealing with a very complex personality. Professor Mills was so complex, it's unbelievable. Very complex personality, This is a guy who publicly claimed to have Nkrumah's sympathies and yet was not ideological at all. You understand? That's a serious complexity,
Did he attend the Ideological Institute?
Yes, he was trained at the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute, but that training never turned him into an ideologue.
Okay.
And indeed, for most parts of his life, his attitude to politics was on the basis of morals, mainly Christian evangelical morals and so on. Now that's a difficult one to deal with, So finally I decided to be as honest as possible in the presentation, to look at his strengths, to look at his weaknesses, and so on. And I think that helped a lot, There's one thing that nobody can deny about Professor Atta Mills. That is his commitment to serve his country. It was so clear. He was so committed to serve his country that he was even ready to risk his health in order to do that duty. And that was remarkable. The other thing which was so remarkable about him was the fact that he was transparently honest. He was so honest that he could deal with everybody, anybody, and get everybody on board on account of his honesty and so on. And I gave a few examples of my personal encounters with him, how he did things that even his close friends were surprised, And one of the things that I spoke about was the fact that he actually wrote a petition to the President of the United States of America, asking the President of the United States of America to release the Cuban Five. Somebody like President Mills who writes such a petition, that was huge. And this was on the account of the fact that he saw the continued imprisonment of the Cuban Five as an injustice. I also spoke about his commitment to the cause of the Palestinian people, and also his insistence that the independence of Iran should not be subverted and so on. And then a bit about him. I mean, you couldn't go to Professor Mills and tell him stories about others and walk away. And I spoke about an incident in which Randy, I was on radio criticizing one of his ministers. And as soon as I finish, I get a call from the president. How can you be doing that to the minister? There's an honest man and so on. I tried to defend my position. He says, come to the office. I'm waiting for you immediately, So I drive to his office and he says, what is happening between you and the minister? And I tried to explain to him. Unknowing to me, he had asked his ADC to call the minister. So I was still telling him the story about my disagreement with the minister. And so when the minister walks in, he says, tell me everything you were saying in his absence, in his presence. So this was the kind of president that we had. And unfortunately, we lost him 12 years ago. And indeed, Randy, this is the kind of president we need today. Today, given all the problems that confront us, you need a president who is able to galvanize everybody on board to find solutions to the problem. And Professor Mills was that kind of person. Professor Mills was not, strictly speaking, a party loyalist. He wasn't. You know, the national interest for him was above all else. And that is why he did so many things. One of the things he did, which was so extraordinary, was the fact that in assumption of office, the municipal and district chief executives who were at post had been appointed by his predecessor. And he asked them to stay on until he was able to go through the processes, you know, that would allow him to appoint his own. And this was against the party rank and file agitation for him to remove them as quickly as possible and so on. So this was an extraordinary precedent. He did his best for Ghana, even though ill health did not allow him to make as deep as an impact as he would have liked to make. But he was an extraordinary personality, you know, who made some significant impact on the local and international scene. I mean, when you talk about the international scene, a lot of people get lost. President Mills refused attempts to force him to send Ghanaian soldiers to La Côte d'Ivoire to join in the effort to overthrow Laurent Gbagbo and to install Alassane Ouattara. And for me, that was remarkable. What was he doing there? He was only respecting the status of the Economic Community of West African States and the AU, which insisted on non-interference in the internal affairs of member countries. And he stuck to that principle to the very end, refusing to participate in the France-sponsored coup d'etat against Laurent Gbagbo. And for me, that was very, very significant. Then one of the other things which I also did was simply to look at President Mills today. So one of the questions that I asked was that, look, we're going to have elections on December 7th. If President Mills was alive, what would have been his attitude? And it's clear. President Mills would have said that the will of the people must prevail, and that whoever the people elect freely ought to have the mandate of the people. Now contrast that with what our current president is saying. Our current president now goes around the country threatening not to hand over to John Mahama. That's a huge contrast. You understand? I also posed the question as to what he would have done given the upsurge of the patriotic revolutions sweeping West Africa. And there's no doubt at all that he would have insisted on maintaining the sovereignty of our states in the fight against neo-colonial penetration by the French and others. He would also have supported the effort to develop a common currency for West Africa and so on. So clearly, I do not think that he would have taken the kind of belligerent and helpful stance which ECOWAS and to some extent the African Union have taken on the unfolding patriotic revolutions in the West Africa region. So Randy, briefly, these are some of the positions that I espouse, you know. And I also gave a little warning to our friends in the National Democratic Congress, a warning that I'm sure would not surprise you. You know, there's been too much talk about arresting, prosecuting, and jailing members of this administration who may have infringed the law or who can be charged with stealing or misappropriating funds and so on. And my position is that, look, if anybody has infringed the law, they have to face the full rigors of the law, no doubt. I mean, nobody should be shielded, I agree. But that should not be the primary focus of an incoming administration. First of all, Achieving success in that sphere is most difficult because it depends on the judiciary, it depends on other state functionaries and institutions and so on. So that's one part. The other part simply is that it tends to consume a lot of effort and resources. And I'll give you a few examples. You know the Dr. Opuni trial. This lasted virtually 7 years. And there's no end in sight. So if you're going to take power in an atmosphere such as we find ourselves in, and spend 7 years on prosecutions without results and so on, what are you going to tell the people who voted for you when next time you come to seek their mandate? So that's a huge problem. So I thought that the emphasis should rather be on meeting the needs and aspirations of the people who would vote the incoming administration into power, rather than focusing attention on prosecutions and convictions and so on. You know. So,
what would you say to those who say that both are mutually inclusive? You don't have to do one at the expense of the other. You can do both.
Yeah, but I have not said that both should not be done.
Okay.
I'm saying that that should not be the main point of emphasis.
Okay.
And that even as you look at prosecutions, even as you look at punishing those who have infringed the law and so on, the principal goal of every administration must be to alleviate poverty and suffering. Mm. That's the principal goal. Mm. You know.
And the key thing, I guess the key thing when I was listening to the key thing is that as a government, you can have enormous power over arrest and prosecution. But in terms of the determination of the matter and how far it travels, and indeed the determination of the matter is out of your hands.
Exactly.
You can do your bit.
Exactly. And Randy, remember that the last time I was here, I also made a point which you disagreed with me somehow, about this whole clamor about father for all, and whether or not John Mahama should become father for all if he becomes president and so on. If you read the presidential oath, it's clear. Every president is enjoined by law to be father for all. The presidential oath is clear. If you're going to take the presidential oath, you can't do any other thing than to be father for all. Because the presidential oath enjoins you not to discriminate against any citizen. And so to treat every citizen fairly and so on. So I spent some time also on that. I spent some considerable time on the calls for constitutional review, which may be useful in some sense, but really doesn't answer any question. So those were some of the things that I...
Okay.